was going to say, take a moment to talk to the person next to you, but I know in a room full of women that I'll have lost about 15 minutes just like that, so don't do that. It is a real pleasure to be here, and I loved being with you last time, so if there's anyone there from last time, great to be back. And I'm with three of my good buddies. So Hannah I've known for many years. She's part of our church, Gas Street in Birmingham. She's our church warden, no less. And I have been the personal beneficiary of her incredible wisdom and teaching. So I'm really excited. And we got 2 hours nattering together on the way here, so that's good. And then Beth, I've known Beth since she was 15, 16, something like that, because I'm really old, which I have to accept. And so, yeah, we go back a very long way. And I'm going to stop. Dorina, anyway, I'll stop. Otherwise, we'll go on and on and on. So I want to start by telling you a story. It should come with a slight warning label on it, because it involves animals who come to a tragic end. I should say that, because I've told a story about animals coming to a tragic end in the past, and I had a lady come up to me at the end absolutely furious and heartbroken, so I feel like I should mention that. But it is quite a good story and quite key to the message, so I will share it with you with some trepidation. Anyway, a tragedy befell the Hughes household about 2 years ago now. And at the time, Tim and I, my husband and I, we lead this church in Birmingham. We also have 5 children by birth and adoption. And at the time, we shared our home with our 5 children, but also 1 dog, 4 chickens, and a rabbit. I say we shared our home. They didn't actually live in our home. We had this courtyard at the time. We moved house since, but we had this courtyard that kind of ran down the side of our house that was gated. And so I thought, perfect place to have some chickens. My kids eat so many eggs. I thought, this is genius. And let's throw a rabbit in for good measure, and a dog. The dog was already there. He's been around for a while. The thing is, I wouldn't actually describe myself as an animal person, particularly. But despite the fact that I'm not inclined towards animals that much, I am really inclined towards my children. And my children have somehow meant that we had accumulated this menagerie of animals at the time. And it's mostly because I can't say no. And so they'll come up to me and say, Mom, please, could we get a rabbit? We promise we're going to look after it. We're going to feed it. We're going to clean it out. Now, I fall for this every single time. And then, of course, guess who ends up looking after the dog, the 4 chickens, and the rabbit? Me. And so, February 2024, I got up early. I'm naturally an early riser. I love trying to get up before anybody else in the house. And so I woke up, and it was this cold winter morning. Do you sense where this story is headed? Yeah. And I came downstairs for anyone else, and I looked sort of out the kitchen window that looked onto this little courtyard. And at that point, I could see the remnant of, let's just say, a massacre that had taken place overnight. And essentially, all 4 chickens, the rabbit, not the dog, had been taken out by our neighborhood fox. One very happy fox, I can only assume. The other important piece of information that I should confess, as I it was awful. It was awful. And as I walked around in the early hours of that morning and sort of surveyed the grim scenes, what I discovered is that the reason that the fox had been able to get into the courtyard in the first place is because I had accidentally forgotten to shut the gate. And that's what this message is called, shut the gate. And I remember that day, it was a Tuesday. I had distraught children, as you can imagine. By the time I made it into the church offices, I felt like I'd sort of run a marathon. And I remember sharing with the staff team what had happened, sort of a bit cathartic. And I remember one of the guys on the team said to me, it reminds me of those verses, you know, the verses in Song of Songs. Not the fruity verses that my husband Tim sometimes sings to me privately. I won't say any more about that. But the verse in, sorry, don't dwell on that for too long. But the verse in Song of Songs that's in chapter 2, verse 15, you may be familiar with it. It says this: catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. And I knew when I heard this guy say, oh, it reminds me of that verse, I just sensed that God was saying something through this. That there was something that he wanted to communicate. Not that I believe God allowed for it to happen, but that he was wanting to use what had happened to communicate something quite profound to me. And that verse just kind of hit me between the eyes. And I sensed the Spirit saying to me, Rachel, I want you to be exceptionally vigilant. I want you to allow me to search you regularly. I want you to allow me to search for any areas of your life where you might be spiritually neglecting to shut the gate. Are there any areas, allow my Spirit just to search you to see if there is any access points where those little foxes, the enemy, essentially the enemy, whose sole intention is ruining the vineyard. And of course, we are in a spiritual battle. We know that we have an enemy. And that one of his particular strategies is to undermine what God is wanting to do in and through us as children of God. And so often, I wonder if we think about spiritual attack as sometimes the big stuff, you know, those big events in our lives. And honestly, that is how spiritual attack can sometimes manifest. You know, some of the stuff that's beyond our control, outside of our control, but I sense God saying in that moment, be really discerning. Be really watchful for the little foxes, the subtle stuff, the accumulation of little decisions or little thought patterns or little hurts that build over time, that if we're not vigilant enough, can ruin the vineyard of our hearts. And that's the essence of the image. The vineyard is our hearts. And of course, it's the place where God chooses to place his treasure, right? And I was reminded of those verses in John 15 where Jesus talks about the vine in the vineyard, and he says, I am the vine, you are the branches, remain in me. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And what I realized is protecting the vineyard of my heart from those little foxes that want to get in and ruin the vineyard essentially came down to these three things. And I want to share them with you this afternoon. Proximity, intimacy, and dependency. And what I recognize in my life is those three things, those foxes were the ones that the enemy was going to come after. My proximity to Jesus, my intimacy with Jesus, and my dependency on Jesus. And the reason that the enemy wants to go after those things is because my effectiveness, my faithfulness, my longevity in ministry, as a wife, as a mother, as a follower of Jesus, as a daughter of the King, they are utterly reliant on me guarding those three things at all costs. And so number one, proximity to Jesus. And when Jesus says in John 15, remain in me, there's an implicit sense of proximity, of closeness. We're meant to stay really close to him, in close proximity to him. And yet I know, when I think about my walk of faith, my journey of following Jesus, I know there are times where I've consciously and unconsciously found myself pulling away from proximity, from closeness to Jesus. And if I reflect on those times, what I recognize is I can boil it down to three reasons that I perhaps unconsciously or consciously choose to pull away from Jesus, and it's these three things. unexpressed pain, unconfessed sin, unredeemed shame. I was chatting to a close friend of mine, and I was sharing with her that at that particular moment, I recognized that I was pulling away from God. Just subtly, mostly unconsciously, but if I was really reflecting on perhaps the prior 3 or so weeks, I had just moved a few degrees away from God, just pulled away. And I was struggling to read my Bible, I was struggling to worship, I was struggling just to sit in God's presence. And she asked me this question, where are you in the garden? Where do you see yourself in the garden? I'm like, what do you mean the garden? She said, the Garden of Eden. Imagine, if the Garden of Eden is where God is, where are you in the garden? She's quite a visual person. I was like, oh, okay, where am I in the garden? I just spent a moment or two thinking about it. And I realized, in fact, what I communicated to her is what I visualized is that I was sitting at one end of the garden on this bench. And in my imagination, God was at the other end of the garden. And the garden was beautiful. There were flowers everywhere, but God was on the other side. And I had deliberately positioned myself on this bench as far away from God as I could possibly be. I was sulking, actually, what I recognized in this imagination. I was sulking. I was annoyed with God. And actually, if I drilled down a little bit further, I felt really let down by God at that moment. I didn't want to be near him. I felt disappointed by him. I felt he hadn't shown up in ways that I had hoped that he would. And so I had noticed that I'd pulled away. I was still in the garden, but I was at the other end. And the reason that I had pulled away from proximity was because it had been a really hard year. And it wasn't like there would been sort of one big crisis. It was more like, like 1,000 paper cuts that year. And I just felt like worn down, like no one cared. I was holding it all together. I was being there for everybody else. But I just felt like no one cared about me, not even God. I was sulking. And it was so painful to be in proximity with God because of how I was feeling, because I hadn't expressed or processed that pain of disappointment, of feeling let down. And that was a problem. One of the most important things that we can learn to do if we're going to really safeguard our proximity to Jesus as daughters of the King is to learn to express and process the pain of disappointment. Because anyone in this room who's been following Jesus for any length of time will know that moments and seasons of disappointment are inevitable. Following Jesus is the best decision that I have ever made. I have walked in and basked in the joy and the peace and the purpose and the love of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And I have got to do things in him, through him, that I never, ever dreamed of, ever thought I deserved. But Jesus says, in this life, you're going to have troubles. I've also experienced my fair share of disappointments. Perhaps not my fair share, honestly. I know others have experienced way more pain and hardship than I have. But it does us no favors to pretend that they don't happen. I think sometimes the danger in the church is that faith can disguise itself as what I would call toxic faith, or toxic positivity that wants to sweep any kind of difficulty or disappointment under the carpet. And it doesn't help us because faith needs to be robust. It needs to be robust enough to process and journey through the disappointments that will come. When the prayers that we pray don't have the answers that we believe they should have had. Because here's the thing, if we don't process that disappointment, what happens is it leaks. it leaks out. Not only does it cause toxicity within us, but then it starts to leak out. It leaks out over our friends, over our family, over our church community. And what happens is it leaves the gate open for the enemy, for one of those little foxes to get in, and the little fox of resentment starts to take root, the little fox of bitterness and cynicism. And before you know it, the vineyard is in ruins. The vineyard of our hearts is in ruins. And there'll be some people I know sitting here, and you're carrying a bucket load of resentment right now. A bucket load of bitterness right now. And maybe you're keeping a lid on it. Maybe you can put the smile on, but you know it's there. And I sense the Spirit saying, bring it to me. Bring it to me. Let's shut the gate. Let's not allow those roots to run any deeper. Because unprocessed pain begins to steal our proximity with Jesus, causes us to pull away. Unconfessed sin. This is maybe a little bit more straightforward. You know, we perhaps fall into a pattern of sin. I mean, we all sin, right? But the difference between sinning and patterns of sin is distinct, because we all know that we can fall into certain ways of behaving or thinking that become habitual in our lives. And those are the things that I'm talking about. And when we don't take the action required to break the pattern, again, it's like leaving that gate open. Or perhaps it's not acknowledging that they're there. It's carrying on like everything's okay. Again, putting on the face, pretending we're okay. And yet we know when the doors are closed, there's stuff that we're doing, or there's ways that we're thinking that we know are consistently not in line with the will of God for our lives. And I wonder if some of us, I know I'm guilty of this, we get really good at deflecting. When we know there are patterns of habitual sin in our lives, we get really good at pointing out the sin in everybody else's life, deflecting away from us. But when we're really honest, if we really allow the Spirit to search us, we know there's stuff that needs to be dealt with. And that's why, if there's unconfessed sin, we don't want proximity to Jesus, because when you step into proximity with Jesus, you suddenly become aware, I need to bring this to him. I need to get this right. And again, I sense there'll be people in the room, and that's you. And there's no condemnation. There's no judgment. There's no shame in this room. This is a space where we can shut the gate, bring it to him, confess it, receive his forgiveness. The other one is unredeemed shame. You know, it's interesting when we think about the Garden of Eden. You know, Adam and Eve are there. They've eaten from the tree of the knowledge of the good and evil. And then they recognize that they're naked and they experience shame. And it's at that point that they decide to hide from God. Again, it's their shame, it's their sudden recognition of their nakedness that leads to shame, that then leads them to pull away from God. They want to hide from him. They don't want proximity to God at that point. And that's what happens with shame. You know, some of us know this to be a reality. Some of us know that we carry shame like a heavy weight on our backs. That was my story. I'm going to share a little bit more about that later this evening. That's the problem with shame. The difference between guilt and shame is that guilt says, I did something wrong, but shame says, I am wrong. I'm inherently bad. Shame just makes us want to hide away, hide from God, but it also makes us feel unworthy. It makes us feel disqualified. And that, again, there'll be people in the room and you think, I don't deserve to be here. I shouldn't be here. Why am I here? Why would God use me? Why would God love me? And you're carrying shame around like a weight on your back. And again, it causes us to step away from him. You know, my 20s particularly, I remember coming back to Jesus. And I was holding all this shame. And I can remember at times I would walk into church, having been a churchgoer all my life, raised in church. And I would walk into church and I would just feel so much shame, so much unworthiness, so much disqualification. I just want to walk right back out again. But this is the promise that we read in Isaiah 61. This is what God wants to do. Instead of your shame, you'll receive a double portion. And it might be that it's unredeemed shame that is causing you to pull away from that closeness, that proximity to Jesus. And he's saying, come close. Don't allow the enemy to make you believe that you're unworthy, that you're unlovable. Come close. Let's shut the gate and allow him to heal you, to remove that shame. Proximity to Jesus. Intimacy with Jesus. Does anyone else find that when they read through like the Song of Songs, you sometimes feel like a little bit awkward? If you've read through the book of Song of Songs in the Bible, it's like this love story. That's like really intimate moments that take place, these interactions between these two lovers. And that's the point. It's like a love affair. It's meant to communicate to us what our relationship with God should. It should be like a love affair, not a duty. And yet, how often do we find, again, if we've been following Jesus for any length of time, that our relationship with Jesus doesn't reflect the love affair that we read in Song of Songs? You know, I remember when Tim and I were first dating. We'd been dating for a little while actually at this point. In fact, we were sort of getting to the point in our relationship where, you know, we were beginning to have like the M conversation, like, is this marriage? Are we in love? Whatever. And I can remember I knew that I was in love with him, and I knew that I wanted to marry him. And we were walking together, and he turned to me like he was going to say something really romantic, and he said, "The thing is, Rachel, I am 99% sure that I love you." And he thought he was being like super romantic. Like I'm 99% sure. And I was like, well, guess what, buddy? 99% sure is not good enough. Come back to me when it's 100%. Unfortunately, he did. Let that be a lesson to you. Don't settle for 99%. And the question I want to ask is this: is there anything that's robbing you of intimacy with Jesus? Are you creating enough space just to be in his presence? Are you setting aside moments where you just waste time with him? Oh, I find this so challenging. You know, because if there's anything that robs us of intimacy with Jesus, it's productivity. Any doers in the room? I'm a doer. I love to get stuff done. Not just get stuff done, but I like to get stuff done in the most efficient way possible. Like if I can find a more efficient way to do it, I'll do it. I'll do it. But at times, my inclination towards productivity and efficiency is an intimacy killer. Forgive me for talking about Tim again. But I remember not so long ago, the kids were sort of distracted doing somewhere else, which doesn't happen very often in our home, I have to say. And so Tim, I think, saw it as his opportunity to sort of sidle up to me in the kitchen and, you know, gave me a big kiss and a hug and sort of, sorry, this is too much, isn't it? Like, you know, nuzzled into my neck, and I'm like, oh, I'm enjoying the affection. And then this thought popped into my head. And without stopping myself, I just whispered in his ear, "Have you remembered to put the bins out?" It's a true story. And he's like, "What? Could you not wait like a minute?" Like, oh, anyway. And the thing is, probably like a lot of you in the room, my life is like a series of spinning plates that I'm trying to keep spinning. And productivity can be such an intimacy killer with Jesus. And much like a marriage, if we lose that intimacy, our relationship with him, it just gets cold, it gets transactional, it gets distant. And there's this other verse in Song of Songs 8:14 that I so regularly hear the Spirit whisper to me, come away with me. Come away with me, my beloved. Actually, last week, I was like battling overwhelm and exhaustion. The plates were spinning. And I remember I had this day where I was like, I've got to be super productive today. By the end of today, I've got to get all these things ticked off my list. But I was feeling so overwhelmed that I felt almost paralyzed to do any of it. And this is another. I suddenly heard Tim in the other room playing his guitar, singing worship songs to Jesus. I'm sorry you can't all have your own personal worship leader living in your home. And I just caught myself and thought, I'm just going to take a moment. He didn't know this. I don't think he does now, because he was in the other room. And I stood in the kitchen, ready to complete all my tasks. And I just lay on the kitchen floor. And there was like this Velux window in our kitchen. I just lay on the kitchen floor. And I stared up at the sky. And it was a rare day where I could see blue sky. And the clouds were just flying past the window. I just said, I surrender. I surrender. And I just lay there for about half an hour. And I'd love to tell you that I sort of interceded and I prayed for. I just lay there and allowed the Spirit to fill me. And, tears of overwhelm and exhaustion just sort of fell down the side of my face. And I could hear Tim singing these beautiful worship songs in the background. And I thought I could really have done with getting some stuff done in that 30 minutes. But it was absolutely the right thing. It's what I needed to surrender. And so, if we want to shut the gate when it comes to our intimacy with Jesus, we have to be mindful of those things: productivity, distraction. Anyone else know that it's like the enemy will get you to do anything else but just read the Bible or spend time in his presence? And then last thing, dependency on Jesus. I'm actually going to say much more about this evening, so I'll say this. This is also a really big one for me. I know that I can move into self-sufficiency so quickly. It's all on me. I've got to get it done. And again, these are the lies of the enemy, like those little foxes that creep into the vineyard. It's all on you. You've got to make it happen. Just keep going on your own. Keep doing it in your strength. And Jesus wants us to know, no, I am the vine. You are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing. We're not the vine. We're not the vine. We're not meant to be the vine. We're just a branch. We're just a twiggy branch on the vine. Now, I think there are probably some outstanding branches in this room, but we're just a branch. We're just a branch. He's the vine, and we were designed to be fully and utterly reliant on him. And for me, one of those pesky little foxes that wants to sneak in to rob the fruitfulness of the vineyard is when the enemy, or when the world, convinces me that I'm anything more than just a twiggy branch on the vine. How do we shut the gate? We choose total dependency on him. Total dependency on him. We're going to take a moment to pray. Maybe, Beth, if you could come up. And so how do we keep those little foxes out? We keep choosing proximity. We embrace rhythms of confession and repentance. We allow Jesus, by the power of the Holy Spirit, into that pain, into that disappointment, into that grief. And when we do, we shut the gate. We keep choosing intimacy. We choose to waste time just in his presence, worshiping him in his word, in solitude. We choose moments where we just lay down our productivity, where we choose to not be distracted so easily. And when we do, we shut the gate. And then we choose total dependency. We recognize that without him, we are just nothing. We continue to resist the inclination towards keeping all the plates spinning on our own, in our own strength. And when we do, we shut the gate. Very last thing. You know, the reason that I didn't shut the gate that night is because it was really cold. It was really dark. I was a bit distracted. And in all honesty, I thought Tim was going to shut the gate. Truth be told. We cannot outsource our own vineyards. It has to be between you and God. We have to take personal responsibility for the state of our own hearts. So easy to blame everything else, blame everyone else. But if we want to keep out those little foxes of the enemy that wants to come after our intimacy and our proximity and our dependency, then we need to take responsibility ourselves. And that might mean today getting some prayer. It might mean making that vulnerable walk from your seat down to the front where people are going to pray with you. They're not going to grill you. They're not going to interview you. You don't have to share anything that you don't want to. But that might be it for you. Coming forward, taking that responsibility and saying, I need you, Lord. I know I've left the gate open to whatever it might be. But I need your spirit now to come and meet with me, to enable me to shut that gate. Shall we stand?